So the real story with Catherine, Princess of Wales, isn't about some grand public meltdown or a screaming match behind palace doors. It's way quieter than that, and honestly, way more devastating. It starts with a little boy pushing away his breakfast plate and ends with the future queen rewriting palace protocol with a single sentence. And the part the palace communications team really didn't want anyone to know, it wasn't a scheduling conflict. It was a child asking to go home and an entire institution hoping that if they just waited long enough, he'd forget he ever asked. But before we get into the details of that rehearsal and the internal document that basically exposed the whole cover-up, make sure to subscribe to Crown Watch so you don't miss any updates on this story. So here's what everyone thought was happening. The Wales family was preparing for a major ceremonial engagement. George, Charlotte, and Louis were all on the preliminary schedule. Kensington Palace, which is the household office that coordinates all the work and communications for William and Catherine, kept Louis's name listed on the summer program. Ceremonial planners were building the whole event around the three children appearing together. And on paper, everything looked normal, except it wasn't. Behind the scenes, Louis's withdrawal had already been privately approved, and the palace had decided to just not say anything. They marked it internally as an attendance adjustment, which is such a cold, clinical phrase that it basically erases the human being at the center of it. Catherine read those words during a private briefing and set the page down without speaking. She had accepted discretion to protect her son, but she was not going to accept language that made his distress sound like a logistical inconvenience. And that's where the story splits into two versions. The public version, where everything is fine and the schedule just needed a minor tweak, and the private version, where a 6-year-old boy had already told his mother he was overwhelmed, and the palace response was to hope he'd get over it before anyone noticed. To understand why Catherine rejected that silence so completely, you have to understand what Louis represents to the public versus what he represents to his parents. To the world, Louis is the spirited one. He's the kid whose facial expressions become memes before the ceremony is even over. He's the little prince who dances when he's supposed to stand still and makes funny faces when he's supposed to look solemn. And people love that, they genuinely do. But to Catherine and William, he's just their youngest child, a little boy who is still learning why strangers watch him, photograph him, and interpret every single movement he makes. And recently, behind the laughter, his parents started noticing quieter moments that never made it to the cameras, moments that changed everything. Catherine has spent years trying to build an ordinary rhythm around George, Charlotte, and Louis. School mornings, shared meals, private jokes, evenings, completely untouched by ceremony. The Wales household carries enormous public interest because William is the future king, but inside their home, rank doesn't protect anyone from the weight of being watched. Louis has always been lively and curious, but his mother started sensing that the attention surrounding him felt different to him now. He was becoming aware of it in a way he hadn't been before. And then came the question. After a recent engagement, Louis waited until the family was alone and asked Catherine why people laughed whenever he moved differently from the adults. She answered carefully, explaining that many people enjoyed his energy and never intended to hurt him. Her voice stayed gentle, her expression did not. When he walked away, she stayed behind, devastated by the realization that public affection can feel exactly like humiliation to a child who doesn't understand why he's being laughed at. William recognized the danger immediately. Royal duty shaped his entire life, but he feared it was reaching his youngest son far too early. And he also knew that silence carries its own threat. If Louis suddenly disappeared from important occasions without any explanation, speculation would grow, and the boy could become the center of an even harsher story. The moment their concern became impossible to dismiss happened during an ordinary breakfast. Catherine mentioned a forthcoming appearance. George started talking about the procession, and Charlotte listened beside him. Louis stopped eating. He pushed his untouched plate away and stared down at the table, suddenly completely silent. Charlotte noticed first. She moved her chair closer until their shoulders were almost touching. George abandoned his story and watched his brother with visible concern. Catherine felt something break inside her. She had protected each child from unnecessary pressure their entire lives, yet the fear spreading across that breakfast table proved the strain was no longer affecting Louis alone. George was watching, Charlotte was compensating, their youngest was retreating, William met her eyes and understood exactly the same truth, that breakfast was painful. But it wasn't the breaking point. The decisive moment came later during a closed rehearsal behind palace doors, when one careless warning transformed Catherine's concern into an irreversible decision and placed her directly against the palace timetable. The breaking point didn't happen before a crowd or during a grand procession. It happened inside a quiet ceremonial room during a private rehearsal where every movement had been planned and every child had been told exactly where to stand. A private rehearsal is basically a practice session with no public present, allowing royal participants to learn the timing, the formal greetings, and the ceremonial positions expected during an official engagement. Louis would be standing beside his siblings for long periods, surrounded by unfamiliar staff, watched by countless cameras. Catherine had originally supported the rehearsal because she believed preparation would calm him. If he knew what was going to happen, maybe the occasion would feel manageable. Instead, every correction tightened the fear already building inside him. A senior aide stepped forward, adjusted the planned order, reminded the children to remain still, and then delivered the words that changed everything. "Everyone will be watching." Louis froze. The lively child who normally fills a room with energy said absolutely nothing. He reached for Catherine's hand, held it tightly, and asked whether he could be removed from the ceremony. Catherine knelt beside him immediately. She told her son that he would never be forced to perform simply because an audience expected him to appear. Louis searched her face like he needed to know whether that promise could actually defeat the machinery surrounding them. She repeated it. Only then did his grip loosen. William watched from the doorway, and his anger was unmistakable. The prince had remained silent while the rehearsal unfolded, but he now asked the senior aide why fear had been used to secure a child's obedience. The official insisted the warning was intended as preparation, not pressure. William rejected that explanation completely. Louis was not a ceremonial object to be positioned, corrected, and displayed. A recorded planning conversation later revealed something even more disturbing. Officials agreed that the incident should remain outside the formal briefing, which is the official summary given to senior royals, because changing the family lineup could dominate public coverage. They weren't trying to protect Louis, they were trying to protect the news cycle. William then discovered that staff had already been instructed to keep Louis's name on preliminary schedules until a replacement communication strategy could be approved. So the plan was never to be honest about what happened. The plan was to buy time and hope the problem went away on its own. Catherine felt her concern harden into resolve. That evening, someone warned her that challenging the official responsible for the program could create a palace crisis. She did not hesitate. Louis had asked to go home, and his mother had made him a promise. By the following morning, the fight was no longer about one appearance. It had become a confrontation over who possessed the right to define Louis's needs, and Catherine was ready to answer. Catherine arrived at the meeting without a prepared speech. Across the table sat the senior courtier responsible for coordinating the family's public program, surrounded by schedules, briefing notes, and carefully polished explanations. A senior courtier is an experienced palace official who helps manage royal duties, public appearances, and sensitive decisions. This was the person who was supposed to be managing things smoothly, and instead he was sitting there with a stack of papers trying to convince a mother to put her frightened child on display. William remained beside Catherine, but allowed her to speak first. When the official suggested that Louis's absence might appear destabilizing, she pushed the papers away and delivered the sentence that shattered protocol. "He is my son before he is a symbol." The closed door changed everything. This meeting would decide whether Louis's withdrawal was announced honestly or disguised as an ordinary last-minute scheduling change. The courtier understood that one altered engagement could create days of headlines, but Catherine understood something more important. Forcing her son to appear could leave a wound long after those headlines disappeared. The official chose his words carefully. He argued that appearances by the royal children reassured the public that the monarchy remained stable and its future secure. With senior members facing uncertainty, the sight of William's family together carried unusual symbolic power. Louis's absence, he warned, might encourage questions the palace was not ready to answer. Catherine did not raise her voice. That restraint made her anger more powerful. She rejected the idea that institutional reassurance should depend on a child standing before cameras while frightened and overwhelmed. Louis had spoken clearly during a rehearsal, and his mother would not permit palace language to erase what he had felt. The courtier attempted to return to the briefing notes. She pushed them farther away. William then removed his folder from the table and closed it. The gesture was quiet but final. The prince had spent his entire life understanding why continuity matters, but he now showed exactly where his loyalty stood. The official looked toward him, perhaps expecting compromise. None came. William told the room that protecting his son was not a threat to the monarchy. Pretending nothing had happened was the real danger. And then came the confession. The courtier admitted that the communications team had intentionally delayed announcing the withdrawal because officials hoped Catherine would reconsider after Louis had rested. Her expression changed. This was no longer cautious planning. This was an attempt to wait out a mother's decision. Catherine issued her answer immediately. No future engagement involving George, Charlotte, or Louis would be announced without direct parental approval. The instructions shifted control away from central planners and back toward the family. But one obstacle remained. Any lasting change required acceptance from the king, the reigning sovereign who holds final authority over the royal program. William knew what came next. He would have to carry the dispute to King Charles and ask his father to choose between inherited palace practice and his grandson's emotional safety. Charles read the internal account alone before summoning William. The page contained no scandal, no constitutional threat, and no public accusation, only the words of a young boy asking to go home. Yet those words confronted the king with a painful choice between the machinery he had inherited and the grandson he loved. For several minutes he said nothing. Then he set the file down and asked why Catherine had not been told the truth sooner. William heard more than anger in his father's question. He heard recognition. As sovereign, the monarch who holds final authority over the royal household and its official program, Charles could approve lasting changes to how younger family members entered public duty. His decision mattered because staff still treated childhood appearances as proof of continuity, while Catherine believed that expectation had already placed too much weight upon Louis. The king carried his own memories into that room. He grew up within a system where discomfort was often hidden beneath duty, rank, and silence. Personal feelings came second to the crown. Public service came first. That training created discipline, but it also left scars he rarely discusses. Now, William was asking him to prevent the same pattern from reaching another generation. William chose his words carefully. He told Charles that Louis would not inherit the silence that had shaped the men before him, even if protecting the child embarrassed the institution. The prince described the rehearsal, the repeated corrections, and the warning that everyone would be watching. Then he repeated his son's final request. He wanted to go home. Charles reacted defensively at first. He insisted that preparation was not cruelty and that royal life could never be stripped of expectation. William did not retreat. He explained how Louis had frozen, how Catherine had knelt beside him, and how officials later reduced the entire incident to an attendance adjustment. The future king's voice remained controlled, but his message cut deeply. Tradition had stopped being guidance and become pressure. And then the file revealed something worse. A documented planning note showed that Charles's approval had been cited during discussions about retaining Louis's name on preliminary schedules. The monarch had never been told what happened during the rehearsal. He had never authorized anyone to disregard Catherine's decision. Someone had used his authority to give concealment the appearance of command. Charles reached for his pen. He struck through the disputed schedule, removed Louis from the engagement, and authorized Catherine to release a direct recorded statement centered on parental responsibility. She would no longer be forced to defend the decision through coded palace language. Her judgment would stand. The decision protected Louis, but it also exposed a communications failure that could not remain unanswered. As the corrected schedule moved through the palace, doors closed, calls began, and the responsible courtier realized that the old rules had just collapsed around him. The first consequence arrived as a single red line through Louis's name. The second came when the senior courtier was summoned and informed that responsibility for the Wales children's appearances would be transferred immediately. There was no shouting, no dramatic dismissal before witnesses. But when the official left the room carrying an unopened folder, the closed door communicated what palace language could not. Catherine's trust had been broken, and authority had shifted. Control moved quickly. Every forthcoming reference to George, Charlotte, and Louis now required direct review by the Wales household, which is the private team supporting William, Catherine, and their children. That change mattered because Central Palace staff could no longer announce the children's attendance before their parents had agreed. George would not be treated as proof of continuity. Charlotte would not become a reassuring presence on demand, and Louis would never again appear on a schedule simply because removing him seemed inconvenient. Catherine received the rewritten statement that afternoon. The old phrase, scheduling adjustment, had disappeared. In its place stood a clear explanation that Louis would spend time away from public engagements while his family protected his privacy and well-being. She read the wording twice, stopping at one sentence that described the decision as temporary. Then she removed it. Catherine refused to place a deadline on her son's comfort. Calling the absence temporary would create another countdown, another expectation, and another moment when Louis might feel forced to prove he was ready. The princess approved the statement only after the language made one promise unmistakable. He would return when the family believed the time was right, not when the palace calendar demanded it. The senior courtier faced his own reckoning. In a documented handover note, he admitted that staff had feared one child's absence would overshadow the ceremony and weaken the monarchy's image of stability. That confession exposed the calculation beneath the silence. Officials had not misunderstood Louis's struggle. They had understood it and still considered public appearance more urgent. William ordered the note preserved. The prince wanted no revenge and demanded no public humiliation, but he needed a record of how easily institutional fear had overtaken human judgment. He also instructed the household to keep every future decision involving George, Charlotte, and Louis inside the family until both parents had given their consent. Catherine stepped into a private corridor after approving the statement and pressed one hand against the wall. She had won the confrontation, yet victory felt painfully close to exposure. Protecting Louis required revealing that something had wounded him, and she could not control how strangers would interpret that truth. Evening brought silence. The schedules had changed. The courtier had departed, and the statement was ready. Yet the hardest conversation remained. Once the officials and carefully chosen words were stripped away, Catherine still had to sit beside Louis and explain what she had done in his name. Catherine found Louis sitting with a half-finished drawing, completely unaware that his name had just been removed from a royal program debated across several households. She sat beside him without aides, briefing papers, or carefully rehearsed language. When she explained that he would not have to attend the ceremony, he looked at her for several seconds and asked only one question: "Are you coming home too?" Her answer became the emotional turning point. Catherine promised that she would complete a shortened engagement and return home immediately afterward. A royal program is the official schedule of ceremonies, visits, and public duties assigned to members of the family. Louis had just been removed from one of its most closely watched events. But his mother refused to explain the decision through institutional language. She told him simply that public appearances mattered, yet they would never matter more than his feeling safe and heard. Louis lowered his eyes toward the drawing. He asked whether staying home meant he had disappointed the family or failed to do what a prince was supposed to do. That question struck Catherine harder than anything said inside the palace meetings. She moved closer and told him that speaking honestly was not failure. It was courage. Pretending to be comfortable when he was frightened would only teach him that other people's expectations mattered more than his own voice. Catherine repeated her promise. He would never be punished for saying that something felt too heavy. And no schedule would decide when he was ready to return. Louis listened carefully, then finally relaxed. The tension in his shoulders eased, and he placed the unfinished picture in her hands as though it contained an answer he could not yet explain aloud. The drawing revealed what the entire dispute had overlooked. It showed all 5 members of the family standing together, without crowns, uniforms, cameras, barriers, or crowds. No one stood ahead of anyone else. No one appeared more important. To Louis, belonging had nothing to do with ceremony. It meant being together in a place where nobody was watching. William waited until the private conversation had ended before entering. The prince did not ask his son to reconsider, defend the palace, or discuss duty. He simply asked how he felt. Louis looked toward Catherine, then told his father that he might attend another event someday, but only when he felt ready. William accepted the answer immediately. He told the boy that readiness could not be commanded, and that courage sometimes meant stepping forward, while at other times it meant stepping back. Catherine watched them and understood that the family had finally reclaimed control from the institution surrounding it. Morning would carry her recorded statement beyond those walls, yet the truth began here inside one quiet room with a promise between a mother and child. That private choice was about to become a national conversation about childhood, monarchy, and the courage to say no. By sunrise, Catherine's statement had displaced every ceremonial headline, but the most powerful public moment came hours later outside Buckingham Palace, which is the monarch's official London headquarters and a symbolic gathering place during moments of national importance. Someone placed a small handwritten card beside the gates. Being a prince should not mean losing your childhood. Others stopped to read it. Some photographed it. By midday, that simple message had become the image through which the country understood Louis's absence and his mother's decision. Public feeling shifted almost immediately. The card mattered because it transformed a private royal dispute into something ordinary families understood. Parents recognized the fear of watching a child struggle. Children understood the relief of being allowed to say no. What palace planners had feared as weakness began to look like courage. Broadcasters treated Catherine's recorded statement not as a royal emergency, but as an unprecedented parental boundary. One presenter read her words slowly before explaining that the future king and queen had placed their son's emotional safety above the demands of public ceremony. Recorded coverage repeatedly emphasized that Louis had not failed an obligation. His parents had simply refused to make childhood feel like a performance. Palace representatives confirmed that the program would proceed with George and Charlotte, while placing no timetable on their brother's return. George would attend, knowing his younger sibling had been heard. Charlotte would stand beside him without being asked to pretend nothing had changed. Their presence carried continuity, but Louis's absence carried a message far more powerful. Belonging did not depend upon appearing. Catherine watched the coverage privately and became tearful. She had prepared herself for criticism, accusations of overprotection, and claims that her family was weakening tradition. Instead, commentators focused on her son's well-being. The princess finally understood that the public had accepted the truth more compassionately than the institution expected. Charles called her directly. The king acknowledged that protecting the next generation might require rejecting customs his own generation had been taught to endure without complaint. He told Catherine that Louis's withdrawal had exposed a painful lesson. Tradition survived through trust, not through forcing children to hide their fear. One national newspaper captured that lesson with a stark front page. An empty ceremonial place filled the center beneath 4 words, "A child before a crown." Outside the palace gates, the handwritten card drew a quiet cluster of families. One child placed another message beside it. A parent wiped away tears. Nobody demanded an appearance. Catherine sought permission within that response. George, Charlotte, and Louis needed more than protection during one crisis. They needed a permanent principle governing every future engagement. With the country no longer demanding Louis's presence, the family could finally decide what his absence would mean for the future. The final decision was recorded without ceremony. Louis would return to public life only when his parents and the young prince himself believed he was ready. No official calendar would decide for him. No communication strategy would conceal his wishes again. By confirming the painful truth, Catherine had done more than cancel one appearance. She had forced an ancient institution to recognize a boundary previous generations had rarely been permitted to claim. Charles approved the change personally. The new family protocol, a binding set of household rules governing future decisions, required explicit consent from Catherine and William before George, Charlotte, or Louis could be included in any announced royal engagement. The king understood why those words mattered. Once a child's attendance became public, expectation turned into pressure. From this moment forward, the family would decide first, and the palace would speak second. The monarchy accepted a difficult truth. Continuity could not be demonstrated by placing young family members before crowds before they were emotionally prepared. The crown might represent history's service and endurance, but children could not be reduced to symbols of its survival. Protecting them did not weaken the institution. It gave that institution something tradition alone could never provide: humanity. Catherine still carried private guilt. Saving Louis from the ceremony had required exposing a struggle he never asked the world to discuss. She wondered whether silence might have protected him more completely, but she also knew what silence had already allowed. Officials had delayed, softened, and concealed the truth while waiting for her son's fear to disappear. William ended that doubt. The prince told her that Louis would not remember the temporary embarrassment endured by the palace. He would remember that his mother listened, that his father stood beside her, and that both parents kept their promise when powerful people asked them to reconsider. Catherine finally understood the difference. They had not exposed their child, they had exposed the pressure surrounding him. Charles preserved Louis's drawing beside the internal protocol. The monarch kept the picture as a private reminder that royal policy affected living children, not abstract reputations. 5 family members stood together on that page without crowns, uniforms, cameras, or crowds. That simple image now carried more authority than every disputed schedule. The official program appeared again without coded language. Louis's name was absent, and no false explanation attempted to disguise why. George and Charlotte would attend. Their brother would remain at home. Nobody demanded a deadline for his return. The ceremony proceeded. The empty place was understood, and Louis remained where Catherine believed he belonged, not hidden in shame, but protected at home, certain that his voice had been heard. His withdrawal was neither defeat nor scandal. It was the moment a family chose emotional safety over ceremony and made the monarchy more humane by choosing the child before the crown.